You know, there aren't that many guys who come into their first season of pro ball as polished and refined as Brandon Sproat is. A 1.71 ERA to this point. He is quickly becoming arguably the best pitching prospect in the organization and one of the best pitching prospects in all of baseball right now. But anyway, talk about movement and shapes, and that's exactly what Cade Morris does, and that's what helps him be so successful, is the way that he tunnels and shapes all of his pitches. Very consistent release point for Cade Morris, who, like you mentioned, started the year at PSL, is with Brooklyn now. He's put together a really nice season, a really nice strikeout to walk ratio, as Vito mentioned. A great first season for Nolan McLean, who he has ace stuff. You know, I know we talk about Brandon Sproat, but don't forget Nolan McLean, because this guy has top-end stuff.
He has a 5-pitch mix, which I think counts as video game stuff. Welcome to Future of Flushing. I'm Vito Calisi. That's Jonathan Barron. On Twitter, you can find me at Vito F. Calisi. On Twitter, you can find him at JMB9191. And what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a little insight on 11 of the guys who were drafted last year and just what their year's been like and what it looks like from draft day all the way till today.
Yeah, draft week's a big week. The Mets had a great 2023 draft. They had a great 2024 IFA signing period back when that opened in January. And
a great deadline, a great trade deadline.
Great trade deadline. So it's weeks like this where a franchise can really inject itself with a lot of talent, and it goes a long way to building a really, really good farm system, a player development system that continues to pump up talent to the major league roster. We know that Steve Cohen has talked about this since day one of his ownership, how important it is for him to have an organization that builds from the ground up. And I think we can all fairly say that since Steve Cohen has taken over, he has absolutely reached that objective, and David Stearns is now entering his first draft. So it's a really exciting time for the Mets, who are going to add a lot more talent to an already incredibly talented farm system, and a lot of that has to do with the 2023 draft.
And no better way to start than talking about Brandon Sproat, who will be pitching this weekend as the Mets representative in the Futures game. Last year, that was Mike Vassal's spot. This year, it's Brandon Sproat. Brandon Sproat was the Mets' second-round pick last year, 56th overall from the University of Florida. And this was a guy who was drafted by the Mets not once, but twice.
He was drafted twice. If you guys don't know the story by now, he was taken out of his junior year. He decided to go back for his senior year of college. Vito and we spoke with him back during spring training, and we talked about all that happened. And he kind of said that, hey, I think everything worked out for a reason. He learned more in his senior year at Florida.
Loves college.
And he, as a result of his time in college, has come into the Mets organization as a pretty made pitcher. You know, there aren't that many guys who come into their first season of pro ball as polished and refined as Brandon Sproat is. A 1.71 ERA to this point, the ninth lowest among more than 500 pitchers with at least 50 innings of work in the minor leagues this year. Started the year at High A Brooklyn, was quickly promoted to Double A Binghamton. He has more than chopped his walk rate in half from Binghamton to Brooklyn, from Brooklyn to Binghamton. And let's just be honest, he's dominated hitters and good hitters as well. His last start against Hartford, 9 strikeouts, just carving up anyone and everyone. Top 100 prospects, not top 100 prospects. He is quickly becoming arguably the best pitching prospect in the organization and one of the best pitching prospects in all of baseball right now. We can really say that about Brandon Sproat, who, when you look back at guys like Matt Harvey and Noah Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom to a lesser extent, Zach Wheeler was a really big pitching prospect. Brandon Sproat is advanced at the stage that he's at compared to when those guys are at the same spot. So Mets fans have every reason to be so excited about Brandon Sproat. And I think we could also say that retaking him, and him, of course, agreeing to be drafted by the Mets a second time, has worked out quite well for this organization.
Yeah, I mean, in just over 73 innings of work, he's only allowed 14 earned runs. Got 85 strikeouts in that time to only 28 walks. And his whip is still under 1. A 1.07 ERA in his time with Brooklyn, which he just absolutely dominated and quickly went from Brooklyn to Binghamton. But Sproat's just a really exciting pitcher to watch. Fastball around 100 miles an hour right now, which is, you know, you like to see 100 on the gun.
Is it good? Is that good, Vito?
It's a nice number to see.
Is it good?
You like to see triple digits.
That's good. Yeah. And his changeup also. I mean, he came into the organization with a filthy changeup. He's been working on the slider and the sweeper. Both of those pitches have plus potential. So, like we said, there's a whole lot of reason to be very, very excited about Brandon Sproat, who, because he was promoted so early in the season and because of all the success he's had at Double A, you never know what's in store for Brandon before the end of the 2024 season. But we're really excited to see it because he is worth watching each and every time he takes the bump. The MILB TV app got you covered. And if you're not already invested in a subscription, we recommend you get one because there is a lot of talent you want to watch when they're out there in this Mets organization.
And the MILB TV, the MILB app in general is better than ever now. They make it really easy where they have, like, you used to have to just scroll between everything, and now they have it so you could just literally go to your organization and they'll give you all of that org scores in one little window. So, like, it's just so much easier to follow. Now, we talked about a guy who went all 4 years of college. Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Talk about a guy who got drafted out of high school. That's AJ Ewing. Just absolutely was doing great at the complex level this year. Got bumped up over to the Florida State League. So seeing these guys get promoted in their first season, especially that first full season of pro ball, AJ did debut last year at the Complex League when we did meet him, when we interviewed a bunch of those guys. But he was the 4th round pick, 134th overall out of Ohio high school. And at the complex level, just had 5 home runs, 7 overall this year. He's still figuring out the Florida State League, but just looked outstanding at the Complex League.
Yeah, I mean, when you say the name AJ Ewing, the first thing that comes to my mind is great athlete. And we see that by the positions that he could play. He plays up the middle, second base, center field, a very twitchy athlete. Like you said, the Mets used a 4th round pick on him out of high school, an Ohio native. But he has been really, really exciting. Smooth lefty swing. And the positional flexibility, we've seen the Mets really take a liking to guys like this, whether it's Jet Williams or trading for a guy like Luis Angel Acuna. If you go to the upper levels of the minor league, Luke Ritter, Carlos Cortez are guys that could play all over. And we know it's a trend in baseball. You want guys who could play all over. You could move them around during a game. You could mix and match with your lineup on any given day. And AJ Ewing fits that bill. So, for the Mets to move him so quickly from the Complex League up to the Florida State League, playing well below the league average level in the Florida State League, it really speaks volumes to what the Mets think about AJ Ewing. And that's because he's a really, really talented young ball player.
Yeah, he hits the ball really hard. In 19 games of the Complex League, /254, 422, 571. And he just really raked at that level, earning that promotion that we talked about before. Let's talk about another college guy now. We're going to move on to Cade Morris, 3rd round pick, 101 overall out of Nevada. John and I have had the pleasure of speaking to Cade 2 times. Once when he was with one right after he got drafted when we went to Florida, one recently that will premiere that interview probably in the next week or so. Cade's earned almost 80. He's got 79 strikeouts this year to 28 walks between both levels because he did get promoted from PSL to the Cyclones. And, look, movement in the system is always a positive, right?
It is. And movement on pitches is a positive, too. And Cade
That's a nice segue.
I don't know if you noticed. I'm nice on the segues.
You feel really nice in your suit and your City Connect socks.
I do.
You're a big suit with Met socks guy.
Only Met socks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I had the City, because now I'm wearing dress socks with my sneakers now.
That's all right.
Looks silly.
But anyway, talk about movement and shapes, and that's exactly what Cade Morris does, and that's what helps him be so successful is the way that he tunnels and shapes all of his pitches. A very consistent release point for Cade Morris, who, like you mentioned, started the year at PSL, is with Brooklyn now, has put together a really nice season, a really nice strikeout to walk ratio, as Vito mentioned. And he's just a ferocious competitor. And one thing we talked about with him last year when we interviewed him down in Florida, we interviewed him again in Brooklyn in early June. He's a big Kobe Bryant guy, and he always talks about the Mamba mentality, and it really shows on the mound. And he's been especially good recently. So Cade Morris, look, all the guys we're talking about here.
You saw that scream off the mound last week?
Yes. Yeah. All the guys we're talking about here, there's a lot of reason for excitement. Cade Morris is one of the many pitching prospects that the Mets took in the 2023 draft that have already really opened a lot of eyes across baseball.
He's developing the four-seamer and the two-seamer right now. And something else we spoke to him about is him and Jonah Tong spend a lot of time in that Cyclones dugout talking about pitches, talking about working on curveballs, talking about watching just developing pitches, different grips, different movements. So he's a guy that's just always itching to learn and get better at his craft. So Cade Morris, a guy that's going to be really exciting to watch go through the system. Let's talk about Nick Lorusso. Nick Lorusso, 9th round draft pick, 276th overall out of the University of Maryland, 3rd baseman. Favorite position to some Mets fans, I would say.
Also plays first, and what's extremely impressive is he is equally as good at both corners, 3rd base and 1st base. You mentioned University of Maryland, his last season there, 102 RBI, single season Big Ten record. So this is a kid who can really hit. The Mets got him in the 9th round, like you mentioned, and he did nothing but hit immediately in the cup of coffee he had last year towards the end of the season. Comes into this year, and he's just a handful of guys in the South Atlantic League who have double-digit homers. And for him to do that where he's done it at Maimonides Park, a pretty difficult stadium to hit at, which we've documented here on the show many a time, makes it even more impressive. So Lorusso is just a guy that can hit. You know, he wakes up and he hits, and he also hits the ball with authority to the pull side in the air, which, you know, teams really want to see a guy be able to do that. High fastballs he's able to handle. Doesn't chase a whole lot. So Lorusso is a guy who Mets fans should absolutely have on the radar. You know, the Mets have another first base prospect, JT Schwartz, who's at Double-A Binghamton right now. So the Mets are pretty deep at this position, and it's really great when you can have a guy play
one more too.
First and third. Who is it?
Ryan Clifford.
Ryan Clifford, who wasn't drafted last year, but a 20-year-old in Double-A who, I mean, since the start of June has just been unbelievable. OPS nearing 900 at 20 years old. So the Mets are rich talent at the corners.
Something else I want to give Nick Lorusso credit for. He's got 41 RBI, and he's leading Brooklyn in average RBI and home runs at the time of this recording.
Really, really impressive young man.
We won't say what team he grew up rooting for. You can go find out. You can go find out why he wears the number he wears and a whole lot of other things.
It's Rizzo, right?
It was Rizzo that he said in the last interview we did with him.
I didn't think it was DeGrom, but you never know.
But you could go check out
he
that
wears
interview.
48, by the way.
I mean, the truth is, I think everybody we're going to be talking about on this list, except maybe one or two, we have an interview with. So if you listen to this episode and you want to get to know these players a little more, go back in the Future of Flushing catalog, because we did sit down and talk to all these guys. Another guy we talked to, the Mets' first-round pick, 32nd overall, out of Parkview High School in Georgia, who's only 19 years old, is Colin Houck. Now, Colin got off to a slow start, but I want to throw a comparison to him to another guy who got drafted out of high school, had a slow start in his pro ball debut. That was Nick Morabito. Nick Morabito had a slow start. Some prospect writers were getting down on him, but sometimes you just need time, especially 19 years old. I think that's a 2-year age difference in the average at PSL right now. So you just got to have some catch-up time, man. It's a hard job. I mean, like, think about you when you got out of college and you went to your first job.
Well, he didn't go to college, but
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When you get out of college and go to your first job, you need some learning time. Imagine going from high school to a job.
I mean, look, the Mets took Colin Houck where they did because they're dreaming on the athleticism that he brings to the table, and there's a whole lot of it. And I really like the Nick Morabito comparison. And fans need to realize that, you know, player development
is not linear.
It's not linear. And Colin Houck has absolutely had spurts this year where he has shown the promise that he brought into the draft with him when the Mets took him 32nd overall.
I mean, he has a slow start, but his 30 RBIs are the second most on the PSL team itself. So
right, and he's had a decent amount of doubles, 12 doubles, 4 triples, 3 homers. And as he continues to grow and get stronger and mature more into his body, those doubles, those extra base hits, they're going to turn into home runs. So Colin Houck is a really, really exciting prospect. Obviously, the Mets took him in the first round in 2023. So there's a reason why he went there, because of the tools that he brings to the table. But Nick Morabito, a really good example of a guy who you just need to let get some seasoning. The Mets challenged him. A lot of his high school peers that he was drafted with in 2023 are still in the complex league. The Mets wanted to be a little bit more aggressive with their first round pick in 2023, and he is going to continue to get better and better.
Why don't we talk about another one of those high school guys who's also with him at the PSL Mets, and that's Boston Barrow, the 8th rounder, 246 overall, out of a California high school, who spent the entire year with the PSL Mets after getting some complex time last year. Off the bat, let's talk about this exciting little nugget about Boston Barrow. Top 3 for the PSL Mets in home runs, average, OBP, and slugging.
When I think about Boston Barrow, I think about the young man that we met last September, and now you look at him, he's put on 20, 25 pounds of just raw muscle. So number one, credit to Boston for his hard work, and credit to the Mets player development staff for working with Boston and helping him get as big as he's gotten, and he's still just a teenager. So that's really exciting. Look, there's a reason the Mets bought Barrow out of his UCLA commitment at more than 3 times the slot value of where he was drafted. The Mets, when they took this young man, had high hopes for him, and the way he's performed in low A, but a level above where you would think that a guy at his age and all that would likely be in the complex league. He has been great for the Mets. He's been hitting leadoff a lot. Marco Vargas has been dealing with injury, so Boston Barrow has been hitting towards the top of that St. Lucie Mets lineup, and he has been almost every night getting on base, making it happen. A very toolsy player, a great athlete, can play all 3 infield positions. So a guy that Mets fans should be really excited about. When you look at the PSL Mets, Boston Barrow is a guy that you absolutely want to keep an eye on.
Great swing decisions, a lot of contact, 2 recipes for a great baseball player. So keep an eye on Boston Barrow.
And a cool name. And he's named Boston because his parents are New England athletes.
Do you like Barrow because it's kind of close to Barron?
It's weird. It's just like they didn't complete the name.
Yeah. It's almost weirder because it's like every time I look at it, I want to say Barron, and then I don't.
Yeah. Shout out the Barrows.
All right, why don't we talk about Nolan McLean, really exciting player who's drafted out of Oklahoma State in the 3rd round, 91st overall, went from Brooklyn to Binghamton, and he has a devastating slider that we saw in the breakout game this year where he really just exploded all over Mets Twitter and Mets fandom as far as prospects to watch go.
Yeah, I mean, he throws gas. He's a unit of a guy. Like you mentioned, that slider, incredible break on it. There was one that had incredible horizontal break during that spring breakout game. It was him and Calvin Ziegler, who's currently recovering from Tommy John surgery, who really kind of stole the show in the 6th and 7th inning of that breakout game that the Mets played, the spring breakout game against the Nationals. But, I mean, Nolan McLean is a beast on the mound. He's a cowboy on the mound, so it's appropriate that he went to Oklahoma State. The way that he carries himself out there at Oklahoma State, he was such a weapon coming in late in the games. He was used more as a reliever at Oklahoma State. He, of course, the two-way player coming out of the draft, and other teams knew that if they weren't leading, if they were trailing against the Cowboys late in games, they were going to have to deal with Nolan McLean. And he was not forgiving to opposing hitters, and he has not been forgiving to opposing hitters since joining the Mets organization, averaging more than a strikeout per inning. So a great, great first season for Nolan McLean, who he has ace stuff. I know we talk about Brandon Sproat, and rightfully so, and some of the many other guys in the system right now, Blade Tidwell, Dom Hamill, Mike Vassell, Tyler Stewart, you name it, Jonah Tong. But don't forget Nolan McLean, because this guy has top-end stuff.
He has a 5-pitch mix, which I think counts as video game stuff, because that reminds me of when you're making your player on MLB The Show, Road to the Show, and you're just throwing everything you can in to the point where there's not even enough buttons on the controller. You got to start throwing in those L3 R1s in there to get some pitches over. But yeah, Nolan McLean, really exciting player to watch. Let's talk about Jack Wenninger, 6th-round pick, 186 overall at the University of Illinois. Spent his whole season at St. Lucie after debuting last year at the FCL. And he's got an 89 strikeout to 23 walk ratio with 1.256 whip in 71 innings of ball.
Yeah, this is possibly the biggest steal for the Mets out of the 2023 draft, especially on the pitching side. A guy who came into the season, not much hype surrounding his name, like you mentioned, 6th rounder, but if you pay attention to the box scores in the minor leagues, you immediately notice Jack Wenninger with multiple double-digit strikeout performances, and it's really the split high four-seam fastball combination that helps him be so effective at the low A level to this point. You mentioned the strikeout to walk ratio, very similar to Cade Morris. So Wenninger has been great, a little bit more polish on the guy coming out of college. Not so sure he has a whole lot more to prove at the low A level. As we know, there are some guys who are maybe a little bit more delayed because there's just a backlog and you can only have so many guys at a certain level right now. But Wenninger has been really, really good this season for the Mets. A really fun guy to watch, works quickly, and there's a reason why the Mets are so high on this young righty.
I mean, strikeouts are fun to watch.
Strikeouts are fun to watch, and he racks them up like they're going out of style.
Strikeouts are fun, John. And another fun thing about Jack Wenninger is that he just got promoted to the Brooklyn Cyclones. So that's a guy that me and you will be seeing a whole lot more of, and maybe we'll even get to talk about him. But what more can you say than strikeouts are fun, and it's going to be fun to watch Jack Wenninger in Brooklyn playing for the Cyclones. Let's talk about Jake Zitella. Now, Jake Zitella, I want to start off and say, John and I did an interview with Jake Zitella last year.
We did.
And the truth is it went off the rails, and that's nobody's fault. That's all three of our faults.
It was your fault.
It wasn't just my fault. We all were.
You were talking. All right.
You were too.
Not about the Barbie movie like you.
Actually, I don't even think I brought up Barbie. I think he brought up Barbie. I think I was surprised he brought up Barbie.
We didn't mention AJ Ewing in his Chipotle order when we talked about AJ.
Well, because
double rice, double everything.
AJ's double rice was crazy. But we didn't talk because AJ's interview went out. I feel bad that Jake Zitella's interview never went out because I had a lot of fun talking to him, but it just went off the rails. Like, look, our interviews sometimes go like 80% not baseball, 20% baseball. This one went like 99% not baseball. I don't even remember if we talked to him about ball, but Jake Zitella makes a ton of contact and he plays aggressively. He's a really high effort guy. 16th rounder he was the 486 overall pick out of high school, and he's made some big improvements from his late last season pro debut last year to where he is now, John.
Yeah, I mean, he's really opened up some eyes at the FCL level this year. Like you mentioned, just a guy who who plays with his hair on fire, a max effort guy, makes a lot of contact. So love to see that. We always love a guy who plays with his hair on fire. But the improvements that we've seen from the end of last year, him getting a cup of coffee straight out of the draft, another high school guy, to his first full season of pro ball, the Mets got their hands on him, worked with him all winter, and all the work that he put in during the offseason has really started to pay off for a guy like Jake Zitella.
And the final guy we're going to talk about today is Austin Tresser, fourth rounder from Missouri, who's been dealing with a small injury, but is on his way back right now. And in that time that he was pitching this year in 31 innings pitched, 45 strikeouts. So he was on the way to some of those numbers we've seen other guys on this list have so far.
Yeah, and a lot of those strikeouts have come with the four-seam fastball. He's also working on refining his secondary pitches. But, I mean, this is a guy, his bread and butter is number one. A high heater, classic, can't beat it. And that's what Austin Tresser brings to the table. Kid from the University of Missouri. You know, there's another pitcher, pretty famous, that pitched for this organization from the University of Missouri. And his name is Max Scherzer. So Tresser, one of many college arms the Mets took in the 2023 draft. We just ran through a couple of them. Guys like Cade Morris, guys like Jack Wenninger, of course, Brandon Sproat, Wyatt Hudepol, another. We'll talk more about him the next time we do this. But Austin Tresser is another one of the many pitchers that the Mets added during the 2023 draft that have this pitching prospect pool so deep, and also the position player pool is so deep as well. And that's because the Mets, the last 2, 3, 4 drafts, have really, really cashed in. They've done a great job scouting, whether it be the top college kids or some diamonds in the rough later in rounds or high school kids, and getting them in here and developing them. We talked with Drew Toussaint last year. If you guys didn't see that interview, please go check it out. It gives you a good insight into what the draft process is like. And we actually asked Drew back then, right after the 2023 draft, okay, now what? And he talked about the whole process starting up and getting going for 2024. And snap your fingers, we're already back here to 2024. But it's not just one faction. There's the player development side, there's the scouting, there's international scouting. There's a lot that goes into the guys who, when they make their major league debut, they have that little patch on their sleeve, being ready for the show. And a lot of that is the player development side of things. And right now, the Mets player development team is as good as any other organization in the major leagues.
So you can always look to Future of Flushing for when you want to know a little bit more behind the players who are coming to the team via trade, via draft, via international free agency, whatever it is. We're here to get you covered. And you know what we'll do, John? How about this? There were some more players drafted this year that we didn't get to talk about on the special because we wanted to keep it shorter than usual. So Friday, when we put out our This Week in Minor Leagues, how about we talk about the players we didn't get to mention today?
Sure thing. Works for me.
Works for me too. All right, guys. So we will see you all again in the future. You can follow me on Twitter at Vito F. Calisi, him on Twitter at JMB9191. We're available on the Mets YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Future of Flushing. Say you want to check out the Major League podcast we do, Meet at the Apple. That's also available all of the same places, but make sure to give both a subscribe, a 5-star rating, a nice review, whatever you can. But thank you so much. And once again, we'll see you all in the future.